The sound of breaking glass shattered the silence of the Brennan household, followed by a scream that cut through the cold April night like a blade through flesh. Clara Brennan pressed herself into the corner of the kitchen, her back against the rough wooden wall, her hand covering her mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. Blood trickled from the corner of her lip where her father's flailing arm had struck her moments before. Thomas Brennan lay face down on the floor, his weathered hands clutching at his head as if he could somehow protect himself from what was coming. Two men stood over him, shadows made flesh in the dim lamplight. The taller one held a pistol, the metal catching the orange glow from the fireplace. The other gripped a leather strap, the kind used to discipline horses, though Clara knew it had never touched an animal in this house. The man with the pistol crouched down, his boots creaking against the floorboards. His face was angular, sharp, like someone had carved it from stone with a dull knife. When he smiled, it was the kind of expression that made Clara's stomach turn. "Mr. Hale made himself very clear, Thomas," the man said, his voice smooth as oil poured over gravel. $8,000 before tomorrow, or else. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, until his eyes found Clara in the shadows. She felt his gaze move over her like hands she didn't want touching her. From the dark hair that had fallen loose from its braid to the torn sleeve of her dress where she'd caught it on a nail earlier that day. "Or else your daughter pays the debt instead," he finished. Thomas made a sound that was half sob, half plea. "Please don't. She's only 20. She's innocent. She doesn't deserve this." The second man, broader and shorter than the first, placed his boot on Thomas's hand and pressed down. The crack of breaking fingers was followed by a howl of pain that made Clara's teeth clench. "Innocent?" the broad man said, laughing. "Nothing's innocent when it comes to money owed, old man, and Mr. Hale doesn't think your little girl is worth $8,000, but he's willing to accept her as payment anyway. He's generous like that." Clara didn't cry. She had no tears left. They'd dried up 3 months ago when her mother Margaret died of the fever, leaving Clara alone with a father who loved whiskey more than he loved his own life. Instead, she looked directly into the eyes of the man with the pistol, using the skill her mother had taught her on long winter nights when the mountain wind howled outside their door. "Look at the eyes, Clara," her mother used to say, her gentle hands braiding Clara's hair by candlelight. "The eyes are windows to the soul. When you see no light reflected there, when the pupils are dead and empty, you're looking at someone who died inside long ago. Those are the dangerous ones." The man with the pistol had eyes like that, empty, void of anything human. The tall man straightened, holstering his weapon. 3 days. That's all the time you have. If you don't have the money, we'll come back for her. And Thomas, if you try to run, if you try to hide her, Mr. Hale will find you both. And what happens then will make tonight look like a church social." They left. The door slammed behind them with a finality that echoed through the small house. Thomas crawled across the floor to Clara, his broken hand clutched against his chest, tears streaming down his face as he reached for her with his good hand. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Clara. I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could win it back. I always think I can win it back." Clara looked down at her father, this man who had once been strong enough to work an anvil 12 hours a day, who had lifted her onto his shoulders when she was small and carried her through the streets of Red Hollow during the 4th of July celebrations. That man was gone. What remained was a hollow shell filled with regret and alcohol. She said nothing. Words felt useless, like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a thimble. Instead, she pushed past him and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness that had swallowed Red Hollow whole. Somewhere out there, Victor Hale was waiting for her. 3 days. The thought repeated in her mind like a death knell as she climbed the narrow stairs to the room she'd shared with her mother until 3 months ago. The room still smelled faintly of lavender and the medicinal herbs Margaret had used to try to fight the fever. Clara sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out a small wooden box from beneath it. Inside was everything she owned that mattered: her mother's wedding ring, too large for Clara's thin fingers, a silver locket containing a curl of Margaret's dark hair, a small leather journal where Clara had written down every recipe, every remedy, every piece of wisdom her mother had shared, and a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, that her mother had given her the night before she died. Clara unfolded it carefully, though she'd memorized every word long ago. It was a list, written in her mother's careful handwriting, of the signs that a man could not be trusted, the signs that a woman was in danger, the signs that it was time to run. "But what if there's nowhere to run to, Mama?" Clara whispered to the empty room. She lay back on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. How could it? In 3 days, men would return to drag her to Victor Hale's ranch, where other women had gone and returned broken, if they returned at all. Clara had seen Mary Catherine Walsh in town 2 weeks ago. Mary had worked in Hale's house for 3 months, 6 years past. She'd been 17 then, bright and laughing, engaged to a ranch hand named Joseph. When Joseph had finally saved enough money to buy her freedom from the debt that bound her there, Mary had returned to Red Hollow changed. She rarely spoke above a whisper now. She flinched when men came too close. And there was a scar on her throat, thin and white, where she'd tried to end the memories with her father's razor. Clara closed her eyes and made a decision. Tomorrow she would go to Victor Hale herself. She would try to negotiate, to bargain, to find some way to protect her father while protecting herself. It was a fool's hope, she knew, but it was the only hope she had. As dawn broke gray and cold over the mountains, Clara dressed in her best dress, the blue one her mother had made for her 18th birthday. She braided her hair carefully, pinning it up the way her mother had taught her. In the mirror, she saw Margaret's face looking back at her. The same high cheekbones, the same green eyes, the same stubborn set to the jaw. "Give me strength, Mama," she whispered. Thomas was still asleep when she left, passed out on the floor where he'd finally collapsed in the early hours of the morning. Clara didn't wake him. There was nothing he could say that would change what she had to do. The walk to Hale's ranch took 2 hours on foot. The morning air was sharp with the promise of snow, though it was already late April. This high in the mountains, winter kept its grip long past when it should have let go. Clara's thin shawl did little to protect her from the wind, but she barely noticed the cold. Fear kept her warm, pumping through her veins like liquid fire. The Hale ranch sprawled across a valley like a kingdom unto itself. The main house was 3 stories of whitewashed wood and glass windows that reflected the morning sun. Cattle dotted the fields beyond, hundreds of them, each one representing money that Thomas Brennan would never see in his lifetime. To the east stood the bunkhouses where Hale's ranch hands lived. To the west, a building that everyone in Red Hollow knew about but never spoke of directly. The place where Hale kept his special employees. Clara's feet wanted to turn and run. Her body wanted to flee back down the mountain road. But she forced herself to keep walking, one step after another, until she stood at the front door of the main house. She knocked. A servant answered, a thin woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She looked at Clara with something that might have been pity. "Mr. Hale is expecting you," the woman said quietly. "This way." Clara followed her through halls lined with expensive paintings and furniture that probably cost more than her father's house. Everything was pristine, perfect, arranged with the kind of care that spoke of wealth and power. The servant led her to a sitting room decorated in deep reds and golds, gestured for Clara to sit, and disappeared without another word. Clara didn't sit. She stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped in front of her, her spine straight. She would not show weakness, not here, not to him. Victor Hale entered 5 minutes later, and Clara understood immediately why men feared him and women dreaded him. He was handsome in the way a wolf is handsome, all sharp edges and predatory grace. His dark hair was streaked with silver at the temples. His suit was perfectly tailored, probably from Denver, or even San Francisco. He moved like someone who had never been denied anything he wanted. "Miss Brennan," he said, his voice cultured and smooth, "what an unexpected pleasure. Please sit." "Son, I'd rather stand." Hale's smile widened. "As you wish. I assume you're here about your father's unfortunate financial situation?" "I'm here to make a deal." "A deal." Hale moved to a side table where crystal decanters held amber liquid. He poured himself a glass, not offering one to Clara. "And what could you possibly offer me that would be worth $8,000? Clara met his eyes, using every ounce of courage her mother had ever instilled in her. 2 years of work. I'll come here as your housekeeper for 2 years. In exchange, you forgive the debt entirely." Hale sipped his drink, studying her over the rim of the glass. "Housekeeper, is that what you think the position would be?" "That's what I'm offering." "I see." He set down the glass and walked closer, circling her like a buyer examining livestock at market. Clara forced herself to remain still, though her skin crawled with every step he took. "You're a beautiful girl, Clara. May I call you Clara? You have your mother's features. Margaret was quite lovely in her day." The way he said her mother's name made Clara's stomach turn. 2 years, Hale continued, still circling. "You would live here, in my home, following my rules, doing whatever tasks I assigned you, and, in return, your father's debt disappears. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And if you refuse?" Clara's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Then my father will die, and you'll take me anyway. But the terms will be worse." Hale laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "You're smarter than your father. I appreciate that." "Very well, Clara. I accept your offer. You will start tomorrow. Pack whatever you need and be here by noon." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by dread. She'd bought her father's life, but at what cost to her own? "However," Hale said, his voice dropping to something darker, "I want you to understand something before you agree. The rules in my house are absolute. You will go where I tell you, do what I tell you, speak when I allow it. And if you break those rules, the deal is void and your father dies. Do you understand?" Clara looked into his eyes and saw the same emptiness. She was making a deal with the devil himself, but she also saw something else. Desire, hunger, the kind of wanting that had nothing to do with housekeeping and everything to do with control. She was about to damn herself by agreeing when the door to the sitting room opened without warning. A man stepped inside. Clara's first thought was that he didn't belong in this pristine room with its expensive furnishings and cultured atmosphere. He was too raw, too wild, too much like the mountains themselves given human form. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his shoulders broad enough to fill the doorframe. His hair was dark and long, pulled back into a rough tie at the base of his neck, though strands had escaped to frame a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the peaks outside. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, and a scar ran from his right eyebrow down across his cheekbone, disappearing into the beard. His clothes were buckskin and leather, practical and worn. A Colt revolver hung from his belt on one side, a hunting knife on the other. But it was his eyes that caught Clara and held her frozen. They were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then those eyes moved to Hale, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Wolf," Hale said, and Clara heard surprise in his voice, followed quickly by something that might have been fear, though Hale tried to hide it behind a smile. "I didn't know you'd come down from your mountain. I heard you had a debt that needed settling." The man's voice was deep, rough, like stones grinding together. He didn't look at Clara again. His entire focus was on Hale. "I'm afraid Miss Brennan and I have already reached an arrangement," Hale said smoothly. "There's no need for outside interference." "That's not what I asked." The man called Wolf reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He tossed it onto the table between them. It landed with a heavy thunk, and coins spilled out. Gold coins. $8,000, Wolf said. cash, right now, for Thomas Brennan's debt. Clara's mind spun. 8,000. The exact amount her father owed. Who was this man? Why would he pay such a sum for a debt that wasn't his? Hale's eyes gleamed as he looked at the gold. His tongue darted out to wet his lips, but he recovered quickly, his mask of civility sliding back into place. "That's a generous offer," Hale said, "but I'm curious. What do you intend to do with the collateral?" He gestured toward Clara as if she were a piece of furniture being discussed. "Not your concern." Hale studied Wolf for a long moment, and Clara watched something pass between the two men, some history she didn't understand. Then Hale's smile turned cruel. "You know," Hale said casually, "this girl reminds me of someone. Someone who used to work for me. Sarah, wasn't it? Your sister." The change in Wolf was instantaneous. His entire body went rigid. His hand moved to the pistol at his belt, though he didn't draw it. The air itself seemed to crackle with violence barely restrained. When Wolf spoke, his voice was so low, so dangerous, that Clara took an involuntary step backward. "Don't say her name." Hale raised his hands in mock surrender, though his smile never wavered. "Just an observation. Take the money. The debt is yours. And I wish you luck with your purchase." Wolf grabbed the pouch, shoved it toward Hale, and then turned to Clara for the first time since entering the room. "Come with me. Now." It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with the absolute certainty that it would be obeyed. Clara looked at Hale, who was counting the gold coins with barely concealed glee. Then she looked at this stranger, this mountain man who had just bought her father's debt as casually as someone might buy a horse. She had a choice: stay with Hale, the devil she was beginning to know, or leave with Wolf, the devil she didn't know at all. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "When faced with two bad choices, Clara, choose the one that gives you the most control over your own fate." Clara walked toward Wolf. "I'm ready." He turned without another word and strode out of the room. Clara followed, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Behind them, she heard Hale's laughter, cold and mocking. "Good luck, Wolf," Hale called after them. "You're going to need it." Outside, two horses waited. One was a massive bay gelding, built for strength and endurance. The other was a smaller chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face and intelligent eyes. Wolf gestured to the mare. "That's Ember. She's yours. Can you ride?" Clara nodded. Her father had owned a horse once, before the gambling had taken everything. She'd learned young. "Good." Wolf swung up onto the bay with practiced ease. "Stay close. The trail is dangerous if you don't know it." They rode in silence. Clara wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Who was he? Why had he paid $10,000 for a debt that wasn't his? What did he plan to do with her? But something in his rigid posture, in the set of his shoulders, told her that questions would not be welcome. The trail led up into the mountains, following a path that was barely visible through the pine trees. The air grew colder as they climbed, and Clara pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. She noticed Wolf glance back at her once, his eyes taking in her inadequate clothing, but he said nothing. After an hour of riding, Clara couldn't keep silent any longer. "Where are we going?" "My home." "And where is that?" "Bitterstone Mountain." Clara had heard of Bitterstone. It was the tallest peak in the range, visible from Red Hollow on clear days. She'd also heard the stories about it, how it was haunted, how men who went up there alone never came back, how the wind through the rocks sounded like the screams of the dead. "Why did you buy my father's debt?" she asked. Wolf didn't answer for so long that Clara thought he was going to ignore the question entirely. Then, without looking back at her, he said, "Because Victor Hale doesn't deserve to have anything he wants, including you." It wasn't a comforting answer. It told Clara nothing about his intentions, nothing about what he planned to do with her. But it did tell her one thing. This man hated Victor Hale, and that hatred was deep enough to cost him $10,000. They rode for 3 more hours, climbing higher and higher until the trees grew sparse and the air so thin that Clara had to focus on breathing. Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, they crested a ridge, and Clara saw it. And a cabin stood in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. It was larger than she'd expected, built from logs that had been fitted together with obvious skill. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. A lean-to stable stood to one side, and beyond it, Clara could see a creek running clear and fast. It looked like a fortress, remote, isolated, defensible. It looked like a prison. Wolf dismounted and began unsaddling his horse. Clara slid down from Ember, her legs stiff and aching from the long ride. She stood awkwardly, unsure what to do, where to go, what was expected of her. Wolf finished with his horse and took Ember's reins from Clara's numb fingers. He led both horses to the stable, leaving Clara standing alone in the clearing. The silence was absolute, except for the wind through the pines and the distant sound of the creek. No birds sang, no animals moved in the underbrush. It was as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. When Wolf returned, he walked past Clara to the cabin door and pushed it open. Inside, Clara followed, stepping across the threshold into a space that was surprisingly clean and well organized. One large room dominated the cabin, with a massive stone fireplace taking up the entire far wall. A rough wooden table with 2 chairs sat near the fire. Shelves lined the walls, filled with supplies, canned goods, bags of flour and sugar, coffee, salt. Hunting gear hung from hooks, rifles, traps, coils of rope, leather strips. In one corner stood a narrow bed, neatly made. In another, a door that presumably led to a storage area or second room. But what struck Clara most was what wasn't there. No personal items, no photographs, no books except for what looked like a hunter's almanac. Nothing that spoke of a life lived rather than merely survived. Wolf gestured to the corner opposite the bed. "You sleep there, I'll sleep outside." Clara blinked. "Outside, but it's freezing at night up here." "I've slept in worse." He moved to the shelves and began pulling down items. Dried meat, hard biscuits, a canteen of water. "There's a shotgun in that box by the door. Do you know how to use one?" "No." "You'll learn. In these mountains, not knowing how to shoot means you die." He set the food on the table, then looked at her directly for the first time since they'd arrived. "I bought your father's debt. I didn't buy you, understand? You're free to leave whenever you want. But if you stay, you follow my rules. You learn to survive. And you don't ask me questions I'm not ready to answer." Clara processed this, trying to make sense of it. "You're saying I can just walk away? Right now? If you want to freeze to death on the mountain, or get eaten by a bear before you make it halfway down, yes." "Then why did you bring me here?" Nathan was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Because 3 weeks from now, when Victor Hale realizes you're not coming to his ranch, he's going to come looking for you. And when he does, I want you to be somewhere he can't find you. Somewhere you can defend yourself if you need to. You're protecting me. I'm teaching you to protect yourself. There's a difference." He moved toward the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start training." "Training for what?" Nathan paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking out the fading sunlight. "For surviving up here, for being strong enough that no man can ever make you a victim again." Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone in the cabin that was to be her home, her school, and possibly her salvation. She sank down onto the rough blanket he had indicated as her sleeping area and let out a shaky breath. Her mind raced with questions, fears, possibilities. This man had saved her from Hale, but to what end? What did he want? What was his connection to Hale? Who was Sarah? And why had mentioning her name turned Nathan into barely restrained violence? Clara pulled her mother's locket from beneath her dress and opened it, looking at the curl of dark hair inside. "I don't know what I've gotten myself into, Mama, but it has to be better than what I was running from. It has to be." As darkness fell over Bitterstone Mountain, Clara wrapped herself in the blanket and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she lay awake, listening to the wind howl through the pines and wondering if she'd made the right choice. At some point deep in the night, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. A man's voice, raw with anguish, crying out words she couldn't quite make out. but she caught one name repeated over and over like a prayer or a curse: Sarah. Clara crept to the window and looked out. In the moonlight she could see Nathan standing at the edge of the clearing, his head thrown back, his fists clenched at his sides. He stood like that for long minutes, a statue of grief and rage carved against the silver light. Then he fell to his knees and Clara heard him sob. It was the most human sound she'd ever heard, and it broke something inside her. This man, this feared mountain man who everyone whispered about in Red Hollow, this man who had paid $8,000 to save a girl he didn't know, he was broken, shattered, held together by nothing but will and the desire for something Clara didn't yet understand. She moved away from the window and lay back down, but now her fear had transformed into something else: curiosity, compassion, the need to understand. Who was Sarah? What had happened to her? And what did Victor Hale have to do with it? Clara closed her eyes and made herself a promise. She would learn the truth. She would understand this man who had saved her, and she would find a way to help him, the way he was helping her. Because if her mother had taught her anything, it was that broken people could heal each other if they were brave enough to try. Chapter 2: The Mountain's Claim. Morning came to Bitterstone Mountain with a quality of light that Clara had never experienced before. The sun rose over the eastern peaks and set the entire world on fire with shades of gold and amber, painting the pine trees in colors that seemed impossible. Clara woke to find herself covered with an additional blanket, thick and warm, that hadn't been there when she'd fallen asleep. Wolf sat at the table cleaning a rifle with methodical precision. He didn't look at her when she stirred. "There's coffee," he said, nodding toward the fireplace where a pot sat warming on the stones. "Bread in the box by the stove. Eat. Then we work." Clara pushed herself up, her muscles protesting every movement. She'd never ridden that far in one day, and her body was making sure she knew it. She poured herself coffee into a tin cup, surprised to find it strong and bitter, but not unpleasant. The bread was hard, clearly a few days old, but she ate it anyway. Hunger made everything taste better. When she finished, Wolf stood and walked to the door. "Come." Outside, the morning air was sharp enough to make Clara's lungs ache. Frost covered everything, turning the clearing into a field of diamonds. Wolf led her to an open area behind the cabin where several logs had been set up at varying distances. He handed her the shotgun she'd seen the night before. "This is a 12 gauge. It'll kick hard enough to knock you on your back if you're not ready for it. But at close range you don't need to aim precisely. Just point and fire." He demonstrated the motion, his movements economical and practiced. "Try it." Clara took the heavy weapon, surprised by its weight. Wolf positioned her, his hands adjusting her stance, pulling the stock tight into her shoulder, showing her where to place her hands. His touch was impersonal, clinical, like a teacher with a student. But Clara noticed that his hands shook slightly when they came close to hers, and he pulled away quickly each time. "Now aim at that log, breathe, squeeze the trigger." The explosion was deafening. The recoil slammed into Clara's shoulder with enough force to make her stumble backward 2 steps. The shot went wide, tearing bark from a tree 3 feet to the left of her target. "Again," Wolf said. They practiced for 2 hours until Clara's shoulder was bruised and her ears rang from the constant noise. But by the end she was hitting the target more often than not. Wolf nodded, the closest thing to approval she'd seen from him. "Good. Now tracking." He led her into the forest, moving silently despite his size. Clara tried to follow his example, but every step she took seemed to snap a twig or rustle leaves. Wolf stopped and pointed at the ground. "Deer tracks. 3 of them, moving east toward water. See how the edges are sharp? These are fresh, maybe an hour old." He looked at Clara. "The mountain will feed you if you know how to read it, but it'll kill you just as fast if you're ignorant. Pay attention." They walked for hours, Wolf pointing out sign after sign, bearscat that was 2 days old, elk bedding areas, places where mountain lions had marked their territory. He showed her which plants were safe to eat and which would make her violently ill. which mushrooms could save her life and which would end it. Clara's head spun with information, but she forced herself to remember every word. This wasn't just education. This was survival. They returned to the cabin as the sun reached its peak. Wolf made a simple meal of beans and salt pork, and they ate in silence. Then he stood and reached for his coat. "I'm going to check my trap lines. It'll take most of the afternoon. Stay here. Don't wander off. And if anyone comes, anyone at all, you shoot first and ask questions never. Understand?" Clara nodded. After Wolf left, Clara explored the cabin more thoroughly. The storage room turned out to be exactly that, filled with pelts and furs in various states of preparation. But hanging on one wall, she found something unexpected: a wooden box, beautifully crafted, with initials carved into the lid. S.W. Sarah Wolf. Clara's heart pounded as she reached for it. She knew she was invading Wolf's privacy, crossing a line he'd drawn when he said not to ask questions he wasn't ready to answer, but she couldn't stop herself. She needed to know. The box wasn't locked. Inside she found a tintype photograph. A young woman, perhaps 17, with dark hair and light eyes, smiling at the camera with joy that seemed to light up the image. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with perfect features and everything to do with pure, uncomplicated happiness. Beneath the photograph was a folded letter, the paper soft with age and multiple readings. Clara unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, clearly written with great care. "Dear Nathan," it began, and Clara realized with a start that she'd never heard Wolf's first name before. "Nathan. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I know you will blame yourself. You will think that you failed me, but I need you to understand something, brother. You didn't fail me. The world failed me. The men who hurt me failed me. Even God failed me, but you never did. What you did for me, helping me when no one else would, giving me a choice when I had none, that was the only kindness I received in my last months. Don't let them tell you it was wrong. Don't let them make you believe you're a monster. I'm choosing this because I can't live in a world that allowed what happened to me. I can't wake up every day and pretend that I'm whole when I'm shattered. I can't smile and nod and act like everything is fine when it never will be again. But Nathan, please, please don't let my death destroy you. Don't let it turn you into the thing they say you are. Find a way to live. Find a way to be more than your rage. I love you. I forgive you. Please forgive yourself. Your sister, Sarah." Clara's hands trembled as she refolded the letter and placed it back in the box. Tears streamed down her face, though she wasn't entirely sure who she was crying for. Sarah, who had suffered so much she chose death over life. Nathan, who had lost his sister and carried that weight like chains. Or herself, caught in a web she was only beginning to understand. She heard the cabin door open and turned to find Nathan standing there, his face carved from stone. He saw the box in her hands, saw the tears on her cheeks, and something flickered across his expression. Pain, fury, resignation. "I told you not to ask questions." "You did," Clara said quietly, "but I needed to know. I needed to understand." Nathan crossed the room in 3 long strides and took the box from her hands. His fingers were gentle despite the anger in his eyes. "You don't understand anything." "Then tell me. Help me understand." He was silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched so tight Clara could see the muscles jumping. Then he set the box on the table and sank into one of the chairs, his head in his hands. "Sarah was 17, he said finally, his voice hollow. "Beautiful, kind, everything good in this world. And a man named Gerald Thornton decided he wanted her. So he arranged for our father to owe him money. When father couldn't pay, Thornton offered to forgive the debt if Sarah came to work in his house." Clara felt ice form in her stomach. She'd heard this story before, too many times. "My father agreed," Nathan continued, "sold his own daughter to pay his debts. By the time I found out, I was 2 territories away, working as a scout for the Union Army. I rode for 3 days straight to get home, but I was too late." He looked up at Clara, and she saw something in his eyes that made her want to look away. but couldn't. Thornton had used her up and sold her to a brothel in Denver. When I found her, she was half dead from opium. I brought her home, tried to help her, but Sarah couldn't live with what had been done to her. One night she took a rope and ended it. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "Sorry doesn't bring her back." Nathan's voice was flat. "I went to Denver, found Thornton, beat him to death with my bare hands in front of 20 witnesses. Then I ran, kept running until I found these mountains. And I decided if I was going to be the monster they said I was, I'd be a monster alone." "But you're not alone anymore. You brought me here." Nathan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I brought you here because when I heard Victor Hale talking about you in his saloon, describing you, saying your name, I saw Sarah's face, and I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't stand by and let another girl disappear into that man's house and come out broken or dead." Clara moved to kneel in front of him, putting herself at eye level. "Victor Hale, he has something to do with what happened to Sarah?" Nathan's hands clenched into fists. "Hale was my commanding officer during the war. April 6, 1862, Battle of Shiloh. The Confederates had us surrounded, 30 men in my unit. Hale was supposed to hold the line, give us covering fire while we retreated. Instead, he ran, saved himself, and left us to die." "But you survived." "I survived. 29 others didn't. And when the war ended, Hale came out here, used his military connections to buy up land, build his empire, while I rotted in the mountains with my ghosts." Clara understood now. The pieces fell into place. "So when you bought my debt, you weren't just saving me. You were hurting Hale." Nathan met her eyes. Yes. The admission hung between them, brutal in its honesty. "And now?" Clara asked. "What happens now?" "Now we wait. In about 2 weeks, Sheriff Porter is going to ride up here with bad news. Hale has filed a complaint, claims I kidnapped you, coerced your father into selling the debt. He's going to demand I bring you back down to Red Hollow for a hearing." Clara's blood ran cold. "And if you don't? Then he'll send men up here to get you, and I'll have to kill them." Nathan said it with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. Simple fact. No emotion. "But before that happens, I need you to do something for me." "What?" Nathan stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains. "I need you to marry me." Clara's world tilted. "What?" "A legal marriage," Nathan said quickly. "We go down to Red Hollow, find Reverend Ashford, have him perform a ceremony, make it binding. Because if you're my wife, Hale can't claim I kidnapped you. You came with me willingly." "And after the hearing?" Nathan turned to face her. "After, if you want, we can end it. You're free to go wherever you want. I'll give you enough money to start somewhere new, somewhere far from here." Clara stood slowly, her mind racing. This was insane. Marry a man she'd known for barely 2 days. A man who was wanted for murder. A man who had admitted he'd brought her here partly out of revenge. But it was also the only way to stay safe. The only way to keep Hale from dragging her back down that mountain. "If I agree," Clara said carefully, "I want something in return." Nathan's eyebrows rose. "What?" "The truth, all of it, no more secrets, no more questions you won't answer. If I'm going to tie my life to yours, even temporarily, I need to know who you really are." Nathan considered this for a long moment. Then he nodded. "After the hearing, after we deal with Hale, I'll tell you everything. Promise?" "Promise." Clara took a deep breath. "Then, yes, I'll marry you." 3 days later, they rode back down to Red Hollow. Clara wore her blue dress again, and Nathan had attempted to clean up, trimming his beard and pulling his hair back. But there was no disguising what he was. The mountain had claimed him, marked him, made him into something that didn't quite fit in civilization anymore. The town was waiting. It seemed like every resident of Red Hollow had gathered in the street, drawn by rumors and gossip and the sheer spectacle of Nathan Wolfe returning after 6 years of exile. Sheriff James Porter met them at the church, his weathered face showing concern. "Nathan, Clara, I got word you were coming." "Is Ashford here?" Nathan asked. "Inside, but Nathan, there's something you need to know. Victor Hale, he's filed formal charges. Kidnapping, coercion. And there's a bounty hunter in town, man named Silas Kane. He's got a warrant from Montana for you." Clara felt Nathan tense beside her. "Silas is here? Arrived yesterday. Says he's got orders to bring you back to Montana, alive or dead. I bought you some time, told him you'd turn yourself in after you settled your affairs here. But Nathan, this is serious. You're looking at a noose." Nathan dismounted and helped Clara down. His hand was steady, but Clara could feel the tension thrumming through him like a wire pulled taut. 3 days, Porter. Give me 3 days to make this right." Porter looked from Nathan to Clara and back again. "What are you planning?" "A wedding." Nathan kept his eyes on the sheriff. "Clara and I are getting married. Today. Right now. And then Hale can try to prove kidnapping all he wants. She'll be my wife, legal, willing." Porter's eyes widened. "Nathan, are you sure about this? Because once you go down this road, I'm sure. Now, are you going to stand there, or are you going to be a witness?" Inside the church, Reverend Daniel Ashford waited. He was an old man, 60 if he was a day, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering to judge anyone too harshly. He looked at Nathan and Clara with something that might have been sympathy. "You're certain about this, child?" he asked Clara gently. "Marriage is a sacred bond." Clara thought about her options, thought about Victor Hale's empty eyes and the scar on Mary Catherine Walsh's throat, thought about Sarah Wolf's letter and Nathan's broken sobs in the moonlight. "I'm certain." The ceremony was brief. Ashford didn't waste time with flowery language or long sermons. He simply read the vows, asked for their consent, and pronounced them husband and wife in the eyes of God and the law. "You may kiss your bride," Ashford said softly. Nathan looked at Clara, and something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, an acknowledgement of the strange partnership they'd forged. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tender. It was hard and claiming, a brand placed in front of witnesses to say, "She belongs to me, no one else can touch her." Clara gasped against his mouth, her hands coming up to grip his arms, and for a moment she forgot that this was pretend, that this was strategy. For a moment it felt real. When Nathan pulled back, his eyes were dark. "Let's go." They walked out of the church into chaos. A crowd had gathered, larger than before, and standing at the front, dressed in an expensive suit with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, was Victor Hale. "Well, well," Hale said, "congratulations on your nuptials, Wolf, though I must say the bride didn't seem entirely willing in that kiss." "She's my wife now," Nathan said flatly. "Legal and binding. Whatever claim you thought you had, it's void." "Oh, I'm not here about the girl anymore." Hale's smile widened. "I'm here about justice." He stepped aside and a man emerged from the crowd. He was tall, nearly as tall as Nathan, with silver streaking through his dark hair. 2 revolvers hung from his belt, worn and well used. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's attention. They were cold, yes, hard. But not empty like Hale's men. These eyes held intelligence, calculation, purpose. "Hello, Nathan," the man said quietly. Nathan went absolutely still. "Silas. Been a long time. Not long enough." Silas Kane pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I have a warrant here for your arrest. Murder of Gerald Thornton, June 15, 1879. Montana Territory wants you back to stand trial. You can come peaceful, or we can do this the hard way." The entire crowd held its breath. Clara could see hands moving toward weapons, could feel the violence brewing like a storm about to break. Then Nathan did something that surprised everyone. He held out his hands for the shackles. "I'll go peaceful," he said, "but I want a hearing here first. Let Red Hollow decide if Montana has a just claim." Silas studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Fair enough. Magistrate Holloway is due in town tomorrow. We'll put it to her." As Silas moved forward with the chains, Clara stepped between them. "No." Every eye turned to her. "Clara," Nathan said quietly, "don't." "If you're going to arrest my husband," Clara said, her voice shaking but firm, "then you'll have to arrest me too, because I'm not going anywhere without him." Silas's expression softened slightly. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you." "It concerns me because he's my family now. The only family I have. And I don't abandon family." Nathan looked at her with something that might have been wonder, or fear, or both. Hale laughed. "How touching. The beast has found someone foolish enough to care about him. But it won't matter, dear girl. He's going to hang. And when he does, you'll be alone again, vulnerable, and I'll be waiting." The words were a threat, delivered with a smile. Clara met Hale's eyes and used every skill her mother had taught her to read what she saw there. Hunger, rage, but also something else, fear. Hale was afraid of Nathan, afraid of what would happen if Nathan ever truly came after him. And that fear made him dangerous. Sheriff Porter cleared his throat. "Silas, I'm putting Nathan in a cell until the hearing tomorrow, but his wife has the right to visit him. Anyone got a problem with that?" No one spoke. As they led Nathan away, Clara followed. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, didn't know if Nathan would be freed or condemned. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't going to let Victor Hale win, not this time, not ever again. Because Nathan Wolfe had given her something more valuable than safety. He'd given her the choice to fight back. And Clara Brennan, now Clara Wolfe, had every intention of using it. The sun set over Red Hollow, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Tomorrow would bring judgment. Tomorrow would bring truth. Tomorrow would determine if freedom was something you were given or something you had to take with your own two hands. Clara looked up at Bitterstone Mountain, rising like a sentinel over the valley, and made herself a promise. Whatever happened, she would survive. She would be strong, and she would protect the man who had protected her, even if it cost her everything. The Red Hollow Jail was a modest structure attached to the sheriff's office, consisting of 3 cells separated by iron bars that had been forged in Denver and hauled over the mountains at considerable expense. Nathan sat on the narrow cot in the center cell, his hands unshackled now that he was locked behind bars, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the stone wall. Clara sat on a wooden chair that Sheriff Porter had brought for her, positioned as close to the bars as she could manage. Between them, iron and air created a barrier that felt more symbolic than physical. They were married now, bound by law and witness, yet separated by metal and the weight of unspoken truths. "You should go back to your father's house," Nathan said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for nearly an hour. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be difficult." "I'm not leaving." "Clara, I said I'm not leaving." She shifted forward in her chair, her green eyes meeting his gray ones with a determination that surprised them both. "You asked me to marry you to protect me from Hale. Well, I married you. That makes us partners in this, whether you like it or not." Nathan's mouth twitched, something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Partners, is that what we are? What else would you call it?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I don't know. I've never had a partner before." "Then I suppose we're both learning." Clara leaned back, studying him through the bars. In the lamplight, his face looked different, softer somehow, though no less scarred. "Tell me about Silas Kane." Nathan's expression hardened immediately. "What about him? He knows you, and you know him. I saw it in the way you looked at each other. There's history there." "There is." Nathan stood and walked to the small window set high in the cell wall. Through it, Clara could see a slice of darkening sky. "Silas and I served together, same unit, during the war." Clara waited, sensing there was more. "When Hale ran at Shiloh, when he left us to die, Silas was there. He saw what happened. Saw Hale abandon us while the Confederates closed in." Nathan's hands gripped the window bars. "Silas took a bullet through his shoulder trying to hold the line. I dragged him 3 miles through enemy territory to get him to a field hospital. Saved his life." "Then why is he here to arrest you?" "Because saving someone's life doesn't mean they owe you theirs. And because Silas Kane is the most honorable man I've ever known. If Montana says I'm wanted for murder, he'll bring me in. Friendship doesn't enter into it. Only the law." Clara processed this, turning it over in her mind. Do you think he'll help you when the hearing comes? I think he'll tell the truth. Whether that helps or hurts me depends on what Magistrate Holloway decides truth is worth. The door to the jail opened, and Sheriff Porter entered carrying a tray with 2 plates of food. He looked embarrassed as he approached Clara's chair. Mrs. Wolf, he said, and Clara noticed Nathan's shoulders tense at the name. I brought dinner. Figured you both need to eat. Thank you, Sheriff. Porter unlocked the cell to hand Nathan his plate, then gave the second one to Clara. Beef stew, still warm, with bread that actually looked fresh. Clara realized she hadn't eaten since that morning and accepted it gratefully. As Porter turned to leave, Clara spoke up. Sheriff, may I ask you something? Of course, ma'am. You've known Nathan for a long time, haven't you? Porter glanced at Nathan, who had sat back down on the cot and was methodically eating his stew. 6 years, give or take, since he first came to these mountains. In all that time, has he ever caused trouble in Red Hollow? Ever hurt anyone who didn't deserve it? Porter's weathered face creased with thought. No, ma'am, he hasn't. Truth be told, Nathan keeps to himself. Comes down twice a year for supplies, pays in cash, never bothers anyone. We've had drifters come through who caused more problems in a night than Nathan has in 6 years. Then why does everyone fear him? Because of what he did in Montana, and because sometimes people need a monster to be afraid of. Makes them feel better about their own sins. Porter tipped his hat. I'll be in my office if you need anything. After he left, Clara and Nathan ate in silence. When they finished, Nathan set his plate aside and looked at her directly. You're trying to build a defense, he said. It wasn't a question. Someone has to. Clara, I killed a man, beat him to death with my bare hands in front of witnesses. There's no defense for that. There's justification. There's context. There's the fact that Gerald Thornton destroyed your sister and would have destroyed others if you hadn't stopped him. Clara stood and moved closer to the bars, close enough that she could have reached through and touched him if she'd wanted to. There's also the fact that Victor Hale was complicit. You said yourself that Thornton worked with Hale, that they were partners in their crimes. That makes this about more than just revenge. It makes it about stopping a pattern of abuse. Nathan stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. You've thought about this. I've thought about little else since you proposed. If we're going to stand in front of a magistrate tomorrow and convince her not to send you to Montana, we need more than just my word that you're a good man. We need to show that what you did was necessary, that it saved lives. And how do you propose we do that? Clara took a deep breath. By getting the other women to speak, the ones Hale hurt, the ones who survived. Nathan went very still. You can't ask them to do that. You have no idea what it costs to stand up and admit what was done to you, to speak those words out loud where everyone can hear. You're right, I can't ask them, but I can tell them my story, and I can tell them about Sarah, and maybe, just maybe, they'll find the courage to tell theirs. Clara, no, Nathan, listen to me. She reached through the bars now, her hand extended toward him. After a moment's hesitation, he took it. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip careful as if he was afraid of breaking her. Your sister died because no one stood up for her, because no one said what was happening was wrong. I won't let that be her only legacy. I won't let her death mean nothing. Nathan's thumb traced slow circles on the back of her hand, an unconscious gesture that sent unexpected warmth through Clara's chest. You're either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps both. Clara smiled slightly. But I'm also your wife, and that means your fights are my fights now. This wasn't supposed to be real, Nathan said quietly. This marriage. It was supposed to be paper. Legal protection. Nothing more. I know what it was supposed to be. Clara squeezed his hand. But somewhere between that church and this cell, it became something else. At least for me. Nathan looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Surprise, certainly. Maybe fear. But also something that looked like hope, struggling to break through layers of cynicism and pain. You deserve better than this, he said. Better than a wanted man. Better than a life spent looking over your shoulder. What I deserve is the chance to choose my own path. And right now, I choose to stand beside you." Clara released his hand reluctantly. "Now, I need to go. I have women to talk to before tomorrow. Be careful. Hale will have men watching. If he thinks you're organizing against him, then he'll learn that I'm more than just the girl he tried to own." Clara picked up her shawl from the chair. "Get some rest, Nathan. Tomorrow we fight." She left before he could protest further, stepping out into the cool evening air of Red Hollow. The town had settled into its nighttime rhythm, lamps glowing in windows, the sound of piano music drifting from the saloon. Clara pulled her shawl tight and began walking toward the boarding house where she knew Mary Catherine Walsh lived with her husband. The boarding house was a two-story structure that had seen better days, its paint peeling and its porch sagging slightly. Clara knocked on the door and waited, her heart pounding. She'd never done anything like this before, never tried to rally people to a cause, never put herself forward as any kind of leader. But her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Sometimes, Clara, being brave isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done despite the fear." The door opened. Mary Catherine stood there, her face showing surprise and then concern. "Clara, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you about Victor Hale, about what he did to you, and about how we can stop him from doing it to anyone else." Mary Catherine's hand went to her throat, to the thin white scar that Clara knew lay beneath her collar. "Come inside." The Walsh's room was small but clean, furnished with simple pieces that spoke of careful economy. Joseph Walsh, Mary Catherine's husband, sat at a small table mending a harness. He looked up as Clara entered, his face wary. "Joe," Mary Catherine said softly, "could you give us a few minutes?" Joseph studied Clara with the same careful assessment Nathan used when tracking game. Then he nodded. "I'll be downstairs. You need me? You call." After he left, Mary Catherine gestured for Clara to sit on the bed while she took the single chair. "I heard you married Nathan Wolfe today. That true?" "Yes." "Why?" Clara met her eyes. "Because he saved me from becoming what you were, what Hale wanted to make me." Mary Catherine flinched, but didn't look away. "You know about that, then?" "Some. Enough to understand." Clara leaned forward. "Mary Catherine, tomorrow there's going to be a hearing. Nathan is wanted for killing a man in Montana, a man named Gerald Thornton, who did to Nathan's sister what Hale did to you." "I remember Sarah Wolfe," Mary Catherine said quietly. "She was younger than me, but we knew each other. Sweet girl. Always had a smile. When she died, the whole town mourned, though no one talked about why she'd done it. Because talking about it would mean admitting that men like Thornton and Hale exist, that they hurt women and face no consequences." Clara took a deep breath. "I want to change that. Tomorrow at the hearing, I want to speak about what Hale tried to do to me. And I'm hoping, if you're willing, you might speak about what he did to you." Mary Catherine stood abruptly and walked to the window. "You're asking me to stand up in front of the whole town and tell them what happened. Tell them how he used me, how he broke me. I'm asking you to help me save a man who stopped a monster. And maybe, in the process, we can stop another monster from creating more victims. It won't bring Sarah back." "No," Clara admitted, "but it might save the next girl, and the one after that." Mary Catherine was silent for a long time, her hand resting on the window frame, her shoulders rigid with tension. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "There are others, other women Hale hurt. Some are still in town, some left and never came back." She turned to face Clara. "If I do this, if I stand up and speak, they'll call me names. They'll say I asked for it, that I wanted it. Let them say whatever they want. We'll know the truth, and so will Magistrate Holloway. Why are you doing this? You barely know Nathan Wolfe. You've been married for all of a few hours." Clara thought about Nathan's broken sobs in the moonlight, about Sarah's letter asking her brother to forgive himself, about the way Nathan had looked at her when she'd refused to abandon him at the jail. Because someone has to stand up, Someone has to say that what happened to Sarah, what happened to you, what almost happened to me, it's not acceptable. It's not just the way things are. It's wrong, and it needs to stop. Mary Catherine's eyes filled with tears. I'm afraid. So am I. Clara stood and crossed to her, taking her hands. But we can be afraid together, and maybe that will make us brave enough. Mary Catherine nodded slowly. I'll do it. I'll speak tomorrow, and I'll talk to the others, see if any of them will join us. Thank you. As Clara left the boarding house, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. It was fragile and tentative, but it was there, a small flame against the darkness. She spent the rest of the evening visiting homes, knocking on doors, having quiet conversations in shadowed parlors with women who bore invisible scars. Some turned her away, too frightened or too broken to relive their trauma, but others listened, and some agreed to stand with her. By the time Clara returned to the jail, it was past midnight. Sheriff Porter had fallen asleep at his desk, his head pillowed on his arms. Clara slipped past him quietly and returned to the chair beside Nathan's cell. Nathan was awake, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall. He looked up as she approached. "Did you find them?" he asked. "I found 5. Mary Catherine Walsh, Sarah Mitchell, Anna Brenner, Elizabeth Crane, and Rachel Murphy. They've all agreed to speak tomorrow." Nathan closed his eyes. "Clara, you have to understand what this will mean for them, the shame they'll face, the questions, the doubt. They understand, better than you or I ever could." Clara sat down, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. "But they also understand that this might be their only chance to be heard, to matter, to turn their pain into something that might protect others. You're remarkable. You know that?" Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." "No. Most people see what needs to be done and look away. You ran toward it." Nathan moved to sit on the cot, closer to the bars. "Thank you for fighting for me, for Sarah, for all of them." "Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. Maybe not, but you've given me something I haven't had in 6 years." "What's that?" "The belief that maybe, just maybe, justice is still possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night deepening around them. Finally, Nathan spoke again. "You should sleep. Use the cot in the empty cell. Porter won't mind." "What about you?" "I'm used to sleeping rough. This floor is softer than most places I've laid my head." Clara wanted to argue, but her body was making its exhaustion known in ways she couldn't ignore. She moved to the neighboring cell, which Porter had left unlocked, and lay down on the cot. Through the bars she could still see Nathan, his broad shoulders outlined against the lamplight. "Nathan?" she said quietly. "Yes?" "When this is over, when we've dealt with Hale and the hearing and everything else, what happens then?" "That depends on whether I'm still alive to see it." "You will be. I won't accept any other outcome." She heard him chuckle softly. "You're very certain for someone who's known me all of 3 days." 3 days can be a lifetime if they're the right 3 days. Clara pulled the thin blanket over herself. "Good night, Nathan." "Good night, Clara." She drifted off to sleep with the sound of his breathing as an anchor in the darkness. Chapter 4. Trial by Blood. Morning came too quickly, announced by the sound of boots on wood and voices rising in the street outside. Clara woke to find Sheriff Porter opening Nathan's cell, a grim expression on his weathered face. "Magistrate Holloway arrived early," Porter said. "Hearing starts in an hour. Nathan, I'll need to put the shackles back on for appearances. You understand?" Nathan stood and held out his wrists without protest. "I understand." Clara rose and smoothed her dress, wishing she had something more impressive to wear for what was essentially a trial. But the blue dress would have to do. It had seen her through a wedding and a night in jail. Perhaps it would see her through justice as well. The courthouse was the largest building in Red Hollow, a 2-story structure that served as both courtroom and town hall. By the time they arrived, it was already packed with people. News of the hearing had spread through town like wildfire, drawing not just the curious, but those with stakes in the outcome. Victor Hale sat in the front row, dressed immaculately in a charcoal suit, his expression one of amused anticipation. Beside him sat a thin man with sharp features and calculating eyes. Carson Flynn, Clara realized. Hale's lawyer from Denver. On the other side of the aisle, Mary Catherine Walsh sat with Joseph's hand clasped tight in hers. Behind them, Clara recognized the other women who had agreed to speak. They looked terrified but determined, a group of survivors preparing to face their worst memories in public. Magistrate Ruth Holloway entered through a side door, and the room fell silent. She was a formidable woman in her early 60s, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. Clara had heard stories about Holloway, how she'd served as a judge in 3 territories, how she was fair but unyielding, how she suffered fools not at all. Holloway took her seat at the bench and surveyed the packed courtroom with the expression of mild distaste. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine whether Nathan Wolfe should be remanded to Montana Territory to stand trial for the murder of Gerald Thornton," she began without preamble. "Mr. Flynn, you may present your argument." Carson Flynn stood, smoothing his jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor. The facts of this case are simple and undisputed. 6 years ago, Nathan Wolfe brutally murdered Gerald Thornton in front of multiple witnesses. Mr. Wolfe then fled Montana and has been evading justice ever since. The warrant is valid. The crime is clear. Montana requests his immediate extradition." "Mr. Wolfe, do you dispute that you killed Gerald Thornton?" Nathan, still shackled, rose to his feet. "No, ma'am, I killed him." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Holloway's gavel cracked down. "Order." "Mr. Wolfe, you understand that this admission makes the legal question straightforward. Montana has every right to demand your return. I understand, Your Honor, but I ask that you hear the full story before making your decision." Holloway studied him for a long moment. "Very well, you may speak." Nathan took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the room. "He laughed at me, pulled a gun. We fought. I killed him with my hands, and I'd do it again without hesitation." "That's murder, Your Honor," Flynn interjected. "Regardless of the circumstances, vigilante justice cannot be tolerated." "It was self-defense," a voice said from the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned. Silas Kane stood there, his expression neutral, but his eyes fixed on Nathan. "Mr. Kane," Holloway said, "you were there when this occurred?" "I was, Your Honor. I witnessed the entire altercation. Gerald Thornton drew his weapon first. Nathan disarmed him, and yes, beat him severely. But it began as self-defense." Flynn's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Kane, aren't you the bounty hunter hired to bring Mr. Wolfe to justice? Your testimony seems conveniently biased." "I was hired by Montana Territory, not by you or Mr. Hale," Silas said evenly, "and I'm under oath to tell the truth. The truth is that Thornton was a predator who destroyed lives. Nathan Wolfe stopped him. By killing him," Flynn pressed. "By taking the law into his own hands." "Your Honor," Clara stood before she could stop herself. "May I speak?" Holloway's eyebrows rose. "You are?" "Clara Wolfe, Nathan's wife." "Mrs. Wolfe, this is highly irregular." "I understand, but I have information relevant to this case. Information about Gerald Thornton and his crimes, and about Victor Hale's involvement in those crimes." The room exploded in noise. Hale shot to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. I will not be slandered by some girl who—" Holloway's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Mr. Hale, sit down and be silent, or I will have you removed from my courtroom." She turned to Clara. "Mrs. Wolfe, you may speak, but be very careful with your accusations." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain calm. Gerald Thornton didn't work alone. He was part of a network that bought and sold women across 3 territories, and Victor Hale was his partner. "Lies!" Hale shouted, half rising from his seat. "I can prove it," Clara said, "because I was almost one of his victims. 3 days ago, my father owed Mr. Hale $8,000. Hale offered to forgive the debt if I came to work in his house. I know what that work would have entailed. The same work that Sarah Wolfe did for Thornton. The same work that other women in this town have done for Hale." "That's slander," Flynn said sharply. You have no proof of these allegations. I have witnesses, women who survived what Victor Hale did to them, women who are willing to speak." Holloway leaned forward. "Mrs. Wolfe, if you have witnesses, I will hear them, but understand that false testimony in my court carries severe penalties." "I understand, Your Honor." Clara turned to look at the women sitting in the rows behind her. "Mary Catherine Walsh, will you come forward?" Mary Catherine stood on shaking legs. Joseph squeezed her hand once more, and she walked to the front of the courtroom. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set with determination. "Mrs. Walsh," Holloway said gently, "please tell the court what you know." Mary Catherine's voice started as barely more than a whisper, but it grew stronger as she spoke. 6 years ago, when I was 20, my father owed Victor Hale $1,500. Hale offered to forgive the debt if I came to work in his house. I was young. I thought I was helping my family. I agreed. She paused, her hand rising unconsciously to touch her throat. The work wasn't housekeeping. For 3 months, Hale used me. He hurt me. When I tried to refuse, he threatened my family. When I tried to leave, he locked me in my room. Finally, my husband, who was my fiancé then, scraped together every penny he had and bought my freedom. "And how did you acquire that scar on your throat?" Holloway asked. Mary Catherine's voice broke. "I tried to end what Hale had done to me, end the memories, end the shame. My husband found me in time, saved me, but the scar remains." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Clara could see several women in the audience crying. "Thank you, Mrs. Walsh," Holloway said quietly. "You may sit." One by one, the other women came forward. Sarah Mitchell, showing the jagged scar on her wrist where she'd tried to cut away the pain. Anna Brenner, describing how Hale had purchased her father's farm debt and demanded payment in flesh. Elizabeth Crane, whose sister had thrown herself down a well rather than return to Hale's ranch. Rachel Murphy, who had escaped only months ago by fleeing in the middle of the night and walking 20 miles through snow. With each testimony, Clara watched Hale's composure crack further. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Hale seemed not to hear. His eyes were fixed on the women speaking, and in them Clara saw something she'd never expected to see: fear. Victor Hale was afraid. When the last woman finished speaking, Holloway sat back in her chair, her expression grave. "Mr. Hale, these are serious accusations. How do you respond?" Hale stood, and Clara could see his hands trembling with rage. "These women are liars, every single one of them. They came to my ranch willingly. They worked willingly, and now they're inventing stories because they've been manipulated by a murderer's wife." "Manipulated?" Clara heard herself say. "These women bear scars, physical and otherwise. How do you explain that?" "Accidents, self-inflicted wounds, the desperate acts of unstable women." Hale's voice rose. "I will not stand here and be accused of crimes I didn't commit by people whose word means nothing." "Their word means everything," Nathan said, speaking for the first time since his confession, "because they're telling a truth that everyone in Red Hollow has known for years but been too afraid to speak. You're a predator, Hale. You've been preying on vulnerable women, using their families' debts to buy access to their bodies. You did it to these women. You tried to do it to my wife, and you did it to my sister through your partner Thornton." "I barely knew Thornton," Hale said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "You served together," Silas Kane said, still standing at the back of the room. "I have records. After the war, you and Thornton went into business together. Cattle at first, then property, then women. I've spent the last 3 days reviewing documents at the territorial office. Your names appear together on a dozen transactions involving debt purchases and property transfers connected to young women." Flynn started to protest, but Hale waved him off. The mask had finally slipped completely. What remained was pure, undiluted fury. "You want to know the truth?" Hale's voice was low and dangerous. "Fine. Yes, I worked with Thornton. Yes, we acquired debts and used them to our advantage. It's business. It's how the world works. The strong take what they want from the weak. That's nature. That's survival. That's slavery, Holloway said, her voice cutting. And it's illegal under territorial law. Then arrest me, Hale shouted. Arrest me and see what happens. I own half this territory. I own the judges, the sheriffs, the politicians. You think you can touch me? He turned to Nathan, his eyes blazing. And you self-righteous bastard. You killed Thornton and think that makes you a hero? You're just another killer. And when Montana hangs you, I'll be there to watch. Mr. Hale, Holloway said coldly, you've just confessed to multiple crimes in open court. Sheriff Porter? Porter, who had been standing near the door, stepped forward. Yes, Your Honor? Place Mr. Hale under arrest. Charges of coercion, trafficking, and conspiracy. He'll be held until a full trial can be arranged. Hale's face went purple. You can't do this. I have rights. I have lawyers. You have the right to remain silent, Porter said, moving toward him. I suggest you exercise it. That's when Hale made his fatal mistake. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small pistol, the kind gamblers carried. In one smooth motion, he raised it and pointed it directly at Nathan. If I'm going down, Hale snarled, you're coming with me. Everything happened at once. Clara screamed. Porter dove for his gun. Nathan, still shackled, tried to move, but was tangled in his chains. And Silas Kane drew both his revolvers with speed that seemed impossible and fired. The shot caught Hale in the shoulder, spinning him around. The pistol flew from his hand, clattering across the floor. Hale dropped to his knees, clutching his wounded shoulder, his face contorted with pain and disbelief. That was for all the women you destroyed, Silas said quietly, holstering his weapons, and for the friend you betrayed at Shiloh. Porter rushed forward and kicked Hale's pistol away, then pulled out shackles and secured Hale's hands. Victor Hale, you're under arrest for attempted murder, trafficking, and a list of other charges that'll take me an hour to read. As deputies dragged Hale from the courtroom, he turned his head to stare at Clara. This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't over. Yes, Clara said calmly. It is. Holloway waited until Hale was gone before speaking. This court will take a brief recess. When we reconvene, we'll address the matter of Mr. Wolf's extradition. Sheriff, remove his shackles. I don't believe he poses a flight risk. As Porter unlocked Nathan's chains, Clara rushed to him. He caught her in his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, and she realized he was shaking. It's over, she whispered against his chest. We did it. Not yet, Nathan said. Montana still wants me. But when the court reconvened an hour later, Holloway had news. I've received a telegram from the territorial magistrate in Montana, she announced. They've reopened the Thornton case based on new evidence. Multiple women have come forward with accusations against him. He's now believed to have been involved in at least 12 disappearances between 1875 and 1879. In light of this information and Mr. Kane's testimony that the killing was initially self-defense, Montana has decided not to pursue extradition. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Nathan stood motionless, as if he couldn't quite process what he'd heard. However, Holloway continued, and the room quieted, this court finds that Mr. Wolf did take justice into his own hands, which cannot be condoned. Therefore, I'm sentencing him to 3 years in the Red Hollow Jail for vigilante justice. Clara's heart sank. 3 years. It was better than hanging, better than Montana, but still 3 years of Nathan's life behind bars. Nathan, however, simply nodded. I accept the sentence, Your Honor. One more thing, Holloway said. Mrs. Wolf, approach the bench. Clara walked forward on unsteady legs. You showed remarkable courage today, Holloway said quietly. You gave these women a voice when no one else would. That takes strength, she paused. Your husband will serve his time here in Red Hollow. You'll be allowed to visit him regularly, and when he's released, you'll both be free to return to your life on Bitterstone Mountain. Does that seem acceptable? Yes, Your Honor, thank you. As Clara turned to leave, Holloway added, Take care of him, Mrs. Wolf. Men like your husband, men who are willing to stand against evil even at great personal cost, they're rare. Don't let the world break him. I won't, Clara promised. I'll wait for him, as long as it takes. That night, in the jail cell that would be Nathan's home for the next 3 years, they sat together on opposite sides of the bars. Nathan reached through to hold Clara's hand. 3 years is a long time, he said. You could leave, start over somewhere new. I'd understand. Nathan Wolfe, are you trying to get rid of your wife already? He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. No, God, no. I just don't want you to feel obligated. I don't feel obligated. I feel committed. There's a difference. Clara squeezed his hand. Besides, someone needs to run that haven for women we're going to build. We'll call it Sarah's Haven, a place where women can learn to survive, to be strong, to never be victims again. We? Partners, remember? Nathan pulled her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. Partners, I like the sound of that. As Clara left the jail that night and looked up at Bitterstone Mountain rising against the star-filled sky, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace, not the peace of an ending, but the peace of knowing the right battle had been fought and, against all odds, won. 3 years would pass. The haven would be built. And when Nathan finally walked free, they would return to their mountain together, not as strangers bound by convenience, but as partners who had chosen each other through fire and emerged stronger for it. The first winter of Nathan's imprisonment was the hardest. Clara rented a small room above the general store in Red Hollow, close enough to the jail that she could visit daily, far enough from her father's house that she didn't have to face Thomas Brennan's hollow apologies and whiskey breath. She took work where she could find it, mending clothes, helping at the boarding house, anything to earn enough to survive while she waited. But waiting wasn't all she did. 2 months after the trial, Clara stood in a clearing at the base of Bitterstone Mountain, surveying the land that would become Sarah's Haven. Sheriff Porter had helped her secure a lease on 5 acres of territory land. And Silas Kane, who had decided to stay in Red Hollow rather than return to bounty hunting, had rallied a group of men to help with construction. The building rose slowly through the winter months, not grand, but sturdy. 2 stories with rooms that could house 15 women, a common area with a fireplace large enough to heat the whole structure, and a small schoolroom where Clara planned to teach the skills her mother had taught her. Reading, medicine, the ability to look into someone's eyes and see the truth there. Mary Catherine Walsh became Clara's closest ally in the endeavor. Together, they created rules for the haven. No woman would be turned away if she needed shelter. No questions would be asked about her past. And every woman who stayed would learn 3 things: how to shoot, how to read, and how to trust herself again. The first resident arrived in March, a girl of 16 named Lily, who had fled from a ranch 40 miles north. She was thin as a rail, bruised, terrified of her own shadow. Clara gave her food, a warm bed, and time. Slowly, Lily began to heal. By summer, 5 women lived at Sarah's Haven. By fall, 12. Clara visited Nathan every evening without fail. She'd sit in her chair beside his cell and tell him about the haven, about the women learning to defend themselves, about the garden they'd planted, about the future they were building, one careful step at a time. Nathan listened and asked questions, and sometimes smiled, though the smiles never quite reached his eyes. Prison was grinding him down in ways Clara could see but couldn't stop. The walls were too close. The sky, visible only through a high window, was too small. He was a creature of mountains and open spaces, and being caged was killing him slowly. "Tell me about the mountain," he said one evening in late autumn. "Tell me what it looks like this time of year." Clara closed her eyes and remembered. "The aspens have turned gold, so bright it hurts to look at them when the sun hits just right. The elk are bugling in the meadows, and the first snow has dusted the highest peaks, making them look like they're wearing white crowns." "I can see it," Nathan said quietly. "When you talk about it, I can see it." 2 more years, Clara reminded him, "and then we'll go home together." But that night, after Clara left the jail, Sheriff Porter stopped her on the street. His face was grave. "Clara, I need to tell you something. About your father." A cold weight settled in Clara's stomach. "What about him?" "He died this afternoon. Liver gave out. Too much whiskey over too many years." Porter handed her a folded paper. "He left this for you, and his house, such as it is." Clara took the paper, but didn't open it. She felt nothing. No grief, no relief, just a hollow emptiness where something should have been. That night, alone in her room, she finally read Thomas Brennan's last words. The letter was short, written in a shaky hand that spoke of illness and age beyond his years. "Clara, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know you won't mourn me. I don't deserve your mourning, but I want you to know that your mother spoke to me before she died. She told me that if I ever had to choose between my life and your happiness, I should choose you. I didn't do that. I was weak. I was selfish. I was everything a father shouldn't be. But I hope Nathan Wolfe is the man I never was. I hope he gives you the life I stole from you. Live, Clara. Live for both of us. Your father, Thomas Brennan." Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box with her mother's locket. Then she cried, not for the father she'd lost, but for the father she'd never really had. The next day she donated Thomas Brennan's house to the church with one condition, that it be used as an additional shelter for women in need. Reverend Ashford accepted gratefully and suggested naming it Catherine's house in honor of Clara's mother. "Your mother would be proud of you," Ashford said as they stood in front of the small building. "Turning your family's pain into something that helps others. That's redemption of the highest order." "I'm not doing it for redemption," Clara said. "I'm doing it because no one else will." The second year passed more quickly than the first. The haven grew. More women arrived, some staying for weeks, others for months. A few deciding to make Red Hollow their permanent home. Clara taught them everything she knew. Silas Kane taught them to shoot. Mary Catherine taught them to read their rights under territorial law. And every evening, Clara sat beside Nathan's cell and told him stories of lives being rebuilt, women finding strength they didn't know they had, futures taking shape out of broken pasts. "You did this," Nathan said one night. "You built all of this." "We did this," Clara corrected. "Your sister's story gave them courage. Your sacrifice showed them that justice is possible, even when it costs everything." Nathan reached through the bars and touched her face gently. "When I get out, will you still want me? After 3 years of waiting? After building a life that doesn't need me?" Clara turned her head and kissed his palm. "I'll always want you. The life I'm building doesn't replace you, Nathan. It makes room for you. For us." The third year brought changes Clara hadn't anticipated. Victor Hale, awaiting trial in a Denver facility, died of a heart attack in his cell. News of his death spread through Red Hollow like wildfire, followed quickly by revelations about the extent of his crimes. Records showed at least 23 women who had disappeared after working in his house, debts that had been purchased and never satisfied, families destroyed by his greed and cruelty. The territorial government seized his assets. His ranch was divided among smaller homesteaders. His money was used to establish a fund for victims of trafficking, and his name became synonymous with the kind of evil that decent people worked to prevent. But the most significant change came in a telegram that arrived for Nathan on a cold February morning. Clara was there when Sheriff Porter delivered it, his face unreadable. Nathan read the telegram twice before speaking. "It's from Montana. They've reviewed my case again. New evidence about Thornton's crimes. Testimony from women he trafficked." He looked up at Clara with something like wonder in his eyes. "They're issuing a full pardon, calling what I did justifiable homicide in defense of family. The murder charge is being expunged from my record." Clara felt her heart leap. "Nathan, that's incredible. That means when you finish your sentence here, you're completely free. No warrants, no charges, nothing." "1 month," Nathan said, his voice rough with emotion. "1 more month and I can leave this cell, go home to the mountain. To you." "To us," Clara corrected. That month crawled by with agonizing slowness. Clara prepared the cabin on Bitterstone Mountain, hauling supplies up the trail with help from Silas and the women from the haven. She expanded the single room, adding a proper bedroom and a larger living space. She stocked the shelves, chopped enough wood to last through spring, and made sure everything was ready. On the day of Nathan's release, it seemed like half of Red Hollow turned out to watch. Not out of fear or curiosity this time, but respect. Nathan Wolfe had become something unexpected during his imprisonment. Not a monster to be feared, but a man who had paid his debt and earned his freedom. Clara waited outside the jail as Sheriff Porter unlocked the cell for the last time. Nathan stepped out, blinking in the bright spring sunlight, his eyes searching the crowd until they found her. He was thinner than he'd been 3 years ago, his face more lined, his hair longer. But his eyes were clearer. The haunted look that had lived in them since Sarah's death had softened into something closer to peace. Clara ran to him, and he caught her, lifting her off her feet as he buried his face in her hair. "I waited," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I felt you waiting every single day." They rode up to Bitterstone Mountain together just as they had 3 years earlier, but everything was different now. Then they had been strangers bound by necessity. Now they were partners who had chosen each other through every trial. Chapter 6. Homecoming. The cabin looked exactly as Clara had described it during her evening visits. Expanded, improved, transformed from a survivalist's shelter into a real home. Nathan stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking it all in. "You did all this?" he asked. "I had help. Silas built the bedroom. The women from the haven helped with the furnishing. Sheriff Porter donated the stove." Clara moved to stand beside him. "But yes, I planned it. I wanted you to come home to something worth coming home to." Nathan pulled her close, his arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "I'd have been happy with 4 walls and you, but this is beautiful." They spent the afternoon settling in, relearning each other in the space that would be theirs. Nathan chopped wood while Clara prepared dinner, the rhythm of domestic life feeling both strange and right after years of separation. That evening, as the sun set over the western peaks, they sat together on the porch Nathan had built during his first years on the mountain. Clara leaned against his shoulder, his arm around her, both of them watching the sky turn from gold to crimson to deep purple. "What happens now?" Clara asked. "We've fought so hard just to get here. What do we do with the peace we've won?" "We live," Nathan said simply. "We work on the haven, help the women who need it, and build the life Sarah never got to have." "And children?" Clara felt her cheeks heat. "Do you want children?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I didn't think I deserved children, didn't think I had the right to bring life into the world after taking life from it." He turned to look at her. "But with you, I think maybe I could learn to believe I deserve good things. Do you want children? I want everything with you. Children, arguments, quiet mornings, hard winters, long summers, all of it." He kissed her then, properly. Not the claiming kiss from their wedding or the gentle touches through cell bars, but a real kiss that spoke of partnership and promise and the future they were building together. 2 years passed since Nathan's release, years filled with the kind of quiet contentment that neither of them had believed possible. The haven thrived, eventually expanding to 2 buildings that could house 30 women. Clara split her time between the mountain and the haven, teaching and learning, healing and being healed. Nathan found purpose in helping the women learn survival skills, teaching them to track and hunt and defend themselves. He was patient and kind in ways that surprised people who remembered the feared mountain man from years before. And then, in the spring of 1892, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Nathan one evening as they sat by the creek watching the water rush past. His hand went to her still flat stomach, his eyes wide with wonder and fear. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure. My mother taught me the signs." Clara covered his hand with hers. "Are you happy?" "Terrified," Nathan admitted. "But yes, happier than I thought I could be. The territorial government is using the funds to establish a permanent women's shelter in Denver. They're calling it the The Sarah Wolf Memorial Haven. Nathan looked up from where he sat holding his daughter, his eyes bright with unshed tears. They're naming it after Sarah? They are. Figure it's fitting, given how this all started. Silas smiled. Your sister's story saved a lot of lives, Nathan. Continues to save them. That's a legacy worth having. After Silas left, Nathan carried Sarah outside and stood looking up at the mountain peaks. Clara joined him, wrapping her shawl around both of them. They're naming it after Sarah? They are. Figure it's fitting, given how this all started. Silas pulled another envelope from his coat. Oh, and this came for you. From the territorial governor.